Well, good morning again. My name is Doug Steele. I serve as Vice President for External Relations, which is a really nice way of saying legislative lobbyist. I like to say advocate for higher education, and also Director of Extension here at Montana State University. And I want to welcome you to this morning's Economic Roundtable on behalf of President Cruzado. Many of you know this is our homecoming week, and there's been a variety of activities she's engaged in, and could not make it over this morning, and we hope she may make an appearance later on today. I'd also like to let you know that this afternoon, for those of you in the Bozeman area or staying on the Bozeman campus, we will be dedicating the Michael P. Malone Centennial Walkway at 2 o'clock. You're certainly invited to join us for that activity. Dr. Malone was the 10th president of Montana State University. He also has a distinguished career as a historian in the state of Montana, and we would invite you to come join us in that celebration and dedication ceremony. And of course, we also have a very small football game tomorrow, and we'd invite you to stay and participate in that. If you're from the Bozeman area, you know there's a lot of excitement around our football team and the stadium expansion, and things are going on now, and we would certainly invite you to come and participate in that activity. It's my honor this morning to be able to introduce the host of today's event. I came to Montana in 2004, and State Senator Jon Tester was one of the first individuals I met in my role as Director of Extension. And so I've had the pleasure of knowing him and working with him over my time here in Montana. And as I've learned more about Senator Tester, there's only one small blemish on his record, and that's the fact he went a little bit too far west to go to school in Montana. But we don't fault him for that. We don't lose very many farmers to the music program at the University of Montana, but he's one that we did lose. Actually, as former president, Dr. Gamble liked to say, we only have one competitive weekend in Montana, and that's when we have a football game between the Cat and the Grizz. And other than that, we like to collaborate, partner, and get along, and I think that's the kind of spirit and philosophy President Cruzado has. Senator Tester is not only a farmer, but I think he is the only farmer currently residing in the U.S. Senate. He's a former school teacher from the Big Sandy area, and he has a reputation not only in his time here in Montana, but his time in Washington, D.C., as making responsible decisions that concern Montana's future. From cutting spending to creating jobs to looking at what goods for Montana, he's a great advocate for us back stateside. He's also known as one of the hardest working members of Senate, and I can attest to that because in my frequent travels to that area, I consistently see him in the office early in the morning, there late at night, and he is a devoted civil servant to Montana and the work that needs to be done on behalf of Montana. He believes our nation is great today largely because of two factors. One is our strong foundation in agriculture and family agriculture, and secondly, our strong commitment to public education. And we here at Montana State University certainly appreciate that philosophy and that attitude as he moves our agenda forward. In the Senate, Jon certainly serves on 5 different committees, including the Senate Banking and House Committee. He's one of the first members, or maybe the first member of Congress, to post his daily public schedule online. I don't know what it is about folks from Big Sandy, but you're always on that cutting edge of technology, so that's great. And we appreciate to know what you're doing on our behalf and what's occupying your time in D.C. He is always open to criticism and comments from the folks back in Montana. He's very accessible to us, and we appreciate those personal characteristics and qualities about him. The other unique thing about Senator Tester, he comes to Montana almost every weekend to hear directly from us what our concerns are, but more importantly, what our aspirations and what he can do to help us as a state. He's holding his 9th Small Business Opportunity Workshop in Butte 1 week from today, and so I encourage you, those who are interested, to please take that opportunity into your calendar. Please help me in welcoming and joining a friendly MSU welcome for Senator Tester.
Well, thank you, Doug. Not many times I have to lower the mic. Thanks, Doug. I appreciate the kind introduction. I'd like to ask you all to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, if you might. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, I want to thank Doug for the kind introduction. And I want to welcome everybody here today. I appreciate you being here. It's great to be in Bozeman on homecoming weekend. I never, ever, ever, ever correct anybody as gracious as Doug Steele, but I got to. Because I don't want to ruin the University of Montana. I actually graduated from the College of Great Falls with a degree of music, so I didn't go quite as far west as you thought, but still in all, it keeps me out of the fray on the Cat Grizz stuff pretty well, because I can tell folks that I'm an Argo, to which they say, what the heck is an Argo? So it's good. Anyway, it's great to be here. The folks on today's panel represent a powerful combination of research expertise and business success. It's that kind of combination that will continue to lead the creation of new jobs here in Montana and new small businesses. I come home to Montana, as Doug said, every weekend to hear from small business owners about what's working and what isn't. It's from those meetings that I'm able to take ideas back to Washington, D.C. and turn them into policy that really does work. That is exactly what happened in late July when Dr. Rob Bargatze from the Montana Bioscience Alliance and Liz Marchi from Frontier Angel Fund, both of them are here today, came to testify in front of my Economic Policy Subcommittee at the Senate. Based on their testimony, I was able to introduce a bill with my friend Pat Toomey out of Pennsylvania, a Republican, that will help small startup companies raise much-needed early-stage capital without registering with the Security and Exchange Commission or going public. The bill changes the SEC rule known as Reg A to allow companies to sell up to $50 million in shares without filing the lengthy paperwork with the Security and Exchange Commission. Currently, businesses can only raise $5 million under Regulation A limit many businesses consider insufficient, and it truly is. That bill came directly from a hearing from Montanans and what is working and what is not working for new small businesses, so we thank them for that. Today's forum is an opportunity for you to share ideas, your ideas, successes, challenges, as well as present me with your suggestions from policy changes to help Montana's economy grow. We all know that Montana is the last best place and a great place to work and live. The purpose of today's event is to make sure Montana is even a better place to do business and make sure that Montana's innovative small businesses have all the tools that they need to be able to grow and succeed. At the end of every panel, we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. And the first panel is already up here. It will examine the role of Montana's universities in facilitating innovation and job creation. Montana's universities have been responsible for a number of important discoveries that not only represent significant advancements, but have also created hundreds of jobs right here in Montana. Joining us today, we have the perspective of some innovators working in Montana's labs, as well as those responsible for successfully transferring those technologies from the lab to the small business sector in Montana. Rebecca Marin, Director of Technology Transfer Office here at MSU. You'll be going first, Becky. Joe Fungi, the Director of Tech Transfer Office at the University of Montana. Dr. Joseph Shaw, a professor here at Montana State University and also the Director of the Optical Technology Center. And finally, Dave Paulson, Research Professor with the Department of Biomedical and Pharmaceutical Sciences at the University of Montana. They will each speak for about 5 minutes, and then we'll have some Q&A. Folks should feel free to approach these folks, and any folks today, about specific questions that aren't answered here. A lot of what goes on here is the interchange of ideas that might not necessarily happen at the microphone, but could happen out in the hallway. So utilize the folks that are here. They're a quality bunch, and we'll get started with you, Rebecca.
Senator Tester, thank you very much for focusing on this very important issue for Montana and for allowing me to speak to these issues today. MSU is the land-grant institution for the state of Montana, and we're very proud of our efforts in teaching, research, and outreach. All of those are components of the various mechanisms that transfer technologies off of campuses. Certainly for patenting and licensing efforts, we need a strong research base. MSU has that. For the 8th year running, we are at or exceeding $100 million in research expenditures. And the Carnegie Foundation has recognized MSU as one of 108 top-tier research institutions in the nation. Similarly, the National Science Foundation has recognized our Technology Transfer Office as being one of the top 10 in the nation for smaller universities. We have 200 licenses for technologies from MSU. 50% of those are with Montana companies, and most of those originate from technologies that were funded by the federal government. About 50 companies have spun out of MSU in the last 15 years, so hundreds of Montanans are working for our licensees and our startup companies. And we think a part of the success that we've been able to achieve is because we're focused on job creation and transferring those technologies for the greater good, as opposed to perhaps maximizing income for the university. The Bayh-Dole Act of 1980 authorized us as universities to own and transfer our technologies. It's been heralded as a highly successful act. Alfred Berkeley, who was the president of NASDAQ for 10 years, states that about 50% of NASDAQ-traded companies originate from university technologies. Certainly, we've seen successes, but we have challenges, and that's what the Senator would like to hear about today. Our biggest challenge as a technology transfer operation is the inherent early stage nature of our technologies. We have great scientists, we have great technologies, but oftentimes we hear from potential licensees that the technologies just aren't moved along far enough to minimize their risk in licensing those technologies. So my recommendation for the Senator to consider would be to establish some sort of gap funding mechanism, some sort of pot of money that a little more money could be invested in some of these nascent but exciting technologies to get them down the road so that companies are willing to license those technologies. That could be a small pot of money in each federal agency for technologies that were funded by those agencies. But we think this would contribute to the success of our operations and technology transfer operations across the nation. Tech parks and incubators, certainly that's another really important component for us as tech transfer people. We need to have the expertise in incubators and tech parks to assist those startup companies. And we know that the American Competes Act has been authorized. We would urge its appropriation because it provides for funding that would plan and remodel tech parks and provide for loan guarantees for tech parks. SBIR authorization, certainly we want to see that reauthorized. That's a critical part to, again, our small companies, several of whom are in the audience today. So those are my ideas, my primary ideas, Senator, as far as how you and I can work together to increase and continue the success that we have both had in creating jobs for Montanans. And again, it's been an honor to participate in your panel, and thank you very much for focusing on this.
Well, thank you, Becky. Joe Fungi, Director of the Tech Transfer Office of the University of Montana.
Good morning. Thank you, Senator Tester, for the opportunity to be here and speak on a very important topic for the state of Montana. University of Montana's research expenditures in 2009 were just under $70 million in that year. And that represented salaries for nearly 700 high-paying Montana jobs, more than 200 assistantships for students, and numerous research discoveries that served as the potential for new technologies, new products, and new jobs. As an illustration of the impact of research on Montana and specifically in Missoula, I'd like to share just an overview of one story, Rivertop Renewables, which you'll hear from later this morning. If we think about research, I feel that it creates 5 things for our community. Number one, it directly creates jobs. In the case of Professor Don Kiley, He brought in USDA research grants over a decade ago that directly created jobs for himself and his staff to work in this great state of Montana and contribute to our tax base. Secondly, research creates opportunities for our students. Although faculty win competitive research grants, it's the graduate students that actually do the work in the labs. And so without these funds, it would be impossible for us to explore these discoveries to the extent that they are. Not to mention that it provides excellent educational opportunities as we prepare the next wave of frontier in science and discovery. Thirdly, research creates new intellectual property. In the case of Don Kiley, 10 years ago, that represented one new invention. Today, that represents a patent portfolio that exceeds 20 pending or issued U.S. and international patent applications. Thirdly, research creates companies. Dr. Don Kiley created a company called Rivertop Renewables with himself and actually a few of the graduate students that worked in his lab. These serve as full-time employees today, earning in some cases 3 times the average wage of our Montana citizen. And finally, fifth, research creates new products. In the case of Rivertop and Don Kiley, there is an ongoing need for us to approach pollution issues such as phosphates. And so in working for a replacement of that with glucaric acid, which is one of the top chemicals professed as a solution to phosphate pollution, Rivertop anticipates bringing a product to the market within the next 12 to 18 months. So those 5 things, I think, illustrate the importance of research and the impact that it can have directly on our community. Secondly, I'd like to address some of the things that the University of Montana is doing to invest in moving research and technology transfer forward. We just completed a strategic planning process on our campus in conjunction with the President's 2020 plan and really focusing our efforts around 3 specific topics. Number 1 is to support a research culture with a vision of impacting humanity through life-changing and life-improving discoveries. It's important for us to continue, as Becky illustrated, to support our research growth. We as a state now are about $200 million a year, and we need to continue to grow, particularly in this increasingly competitive environment. So one of the things that we're doing on our campus is we're investing in translational research. That specifically means Dr. Dave Polson. Commercializing life science technology is a very difficult process. As you take an early stage biotech discovery, you need to advance through preclinical, clinical, and then commercialization stages. And so we're beginning to invest on the preclinical stage by putting resources toward advancing some of our discoveries forward in the area of a translational research initiative. The second major focus is on nurturing a spirit of entrepreneurship among university students, faculty, and staff. I think it's very exciting to be part of a college campus where students still really serve as the lifeblood of why we're all here. And so we have established as an office some joint initiatives with the School of Business Administration. This involves taking technologies and putting them to the hands of students as student projects to develop business plans and develop marketing assessments. We've also been able to establish an advisory board which brings business expertise to the table as we evaluate the prospect of the new technologies resulting from our research efforts at the university. And we hope that this can be combined into a future effort to reestablish an entrepreneurship center at the University of Montana. The third area of investment for the University of Montana is in cultivating public-private partnerships to launch and grow companies. I'm a firm believer that when you consider the research institution's role in technology transfer, its primary focus and strength really still is in the discovery stage. The private sector is much more equipped in terms of expertise and capitalization to be able to advance technologies into the marketplace. So one of the most recent investments that we've been able to make is in the terms of a $3.5 million EDA investment in an incubator in Missoula. The university directly put up $1.75 million to expand Montech, which is located just off of campus. And that will accomplish 2 things. It will transition a business model so we can better engage with the private sector as an institution to help transition technologies out of our lab and also to help the expansion of one of our primary tenants there in Missoula, Rivertop Renewables. In closing, I'd like to share 3 suggestions that we might consider at the federal level as well as at the regional level as to how we might be able to better perform. First would be, as Becky mentioned, SBIR reform. Enhancing the flexibility of SBIR grants to better accommodate university employees would stimulate greater interest in commercialization activities among research faculty and staff. Flexibilities could include the allocation of federal funds toward Phase 0 grants and/or moving the eligibility requirement that prevents researchers who are not full-time with the small business from applying for funds. For a rural state such as Montana, SBIR funding is critically important for the commercialization of research as a result of limited access to investment capital. We appreciate your efforts to improve that, but we still think we have a long ways to go. SBIR funding has already advanced some of the University of Montana's discoveries beyond proof of concept, and such SBIR reform has the potential to further enhance technology transfer activities. Second has to do with R&D tax credits. Permanently establishing the federal R&D tax credit could allow many early-stage, high-growth companies across the nation to reduce their tax burden, freeing up cash for activities aimed at commercialization and growth. A virtual biotech spin-out of the University of Montana recently leveraged tax credit dollars to pursue key intellectual property and fund clinical trial activities aimed at commercializing a university-discovered treatment for stroke and traumatic brain injury. This need for non-equity cash is common among early-stage university-based startups, thereby strengthening the basis for a permanent R&D tax credit. The third has to do with patent reform. We know there's a lot of activity in this area due to recent legislation, but creating a mechanism to financially assist universities with the pursuit and protection of key intellectual property could produce stronger patent portfolios, which are of significant importance to high-tech companies seeking to obtain investment capital. A few recommendations to this effect have been discussed at the national level, including an increase in the indirect cost limitations associated with our federal grants, and secondly, a federally funded patent reimbursement pool. Solid patent protection serves as a key foundational element for research-derived inventions. The availability of supporting funds to more aggressively protect groundbreaking university discoveries derived from federally funded research could significantly enhance the amount of intellectual property available to the private sector. In closing, I'd like to thank you again for your time and make one personal suggestion for us as a state is that I really think that we can do a much better job of telling our story. Rivertop Renewable serves as one example, but out of research at the University of Montana this year, we had technology, metal extraction technology that was actually part of a commissioning in China. We also have a small business in Missoula that produces sensors that are used around the world. So there are many other stories that we can do a better job of telling, and we look forward to working with you, Senator Tester, and your staff to tell that story. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Joe. Appreciate the comments. Dr. Joseph Shaw, a professor here at MSU and also the director of the Optical Technology Center. You're up next, Joe.
Senator Tester, thank you for the opportunity of speaking here today. I really appreciate it. In my role as director of the Optical Technology Center, I promote education and research and technology transfer in the fields of optical science and engineering here at MSU Bozeman. My primary aim today here is to tell you a story of success of how MSU, with its education and research programs, is helping to create and sustain a rapidly growing cluster of high technology companies in the laser and optics area. I begin this story in 1980, the year that the Bayh-Dole Act was passed by the Congress, incidentally. That year marks the formation of the first optics-related company here in Bozeman. It was a company to manufacture products that were used to splice optical fibers that went on to become the backbone of the internet. By 1996, optics-related companies had been formed in Bozeman, or in the Bozeman area, to manufacture solid-state lasers, equipment to test and control miniature diode lasers, test space-qualified optical hardware, and to also grow some of the highest purity laser crystals and optical materials in the world. One of the key elements that was common to all of these companies locating here and growing here in Bozeman was Montana State University and the research program and availability to students. One of the original 5 companies was created as a spin-off from one of the original 6 companies was created as a spin-off from MSU Research. Another was formed by an MSU graduate who just simply wanted to come home and live in Montana and fish. Yet another chose Bozeman for the opportunity of working with a unique laser physics program that we had here, and the others chose Bozeman largely, or at least in part, because of their desired availability to our faculty, our research labs, and our students. The number of optics-related companies formed or moved to Bozeman by the year 2000 grew to 14, and by the year 2010, 32 optics-related companies had been formed right here in the small town of Bozeman, Montana. At least 24 of those companies are still operating here. Some have moved away, some have gone the way of businesses that don't quite make it. We enjoy a rapidly growing reputation worldwide in the education, research, and industrial fields. I can tell you anecdotally that when I came to MSU 10 years ago, I would go to conferences and people would say, Bozeman, where's that? And now I go to an optics conference and people always comment, Bozeman, wow, there's something happening there, it's big time. Before about a decade ago, our engineering and science graduates had no choice but to leave the state if they wanted to work in the field of lasers and optics. But now, today, many of our best graduates are hired by local companies, for example, Bridger Photonics, Pete Roos will be talking to you later today. One key to this remarkable success has been curiosity-driven research by the faculty and the students. And I want to emphasize that nearly all of the early optics research at MSU was basic research, fundamental science. And so, despite that, we see the growth of technology and the growth of companies. Sometimes we make the mistake of thinking that basic science isn't where technology comes from, but it actually is, because that's the key to getting the answers to tomorrow's questions. Our professors and students are incredibly capable of asking new questions whose answers sometime lead to tomorrow's jobs and tomorrow's technology. By hiring the best, creating an academic environment where they can work with motivated students and pursue their curiosity-driven passion, and providing effective guidance in the often confusing world, at least to us faculty members, of technology transfer, MSU has shown that we can succeed in both research, education, and commercialization. We are in the midst of a great research-driven economic development story here in Bozeman. Two things that can help sustain and improve this success include, and I understand my first point is at the state level, but you had that on your bullets of things to ask. At the state level, quite frankly, we need better recognition of the importance of research and graduate education in the form of metrics that measure that instead of only measuring undergraduate productivity. Number two, at the federal level, I think we could benefit from enhanced and increased flexibility and maybe even availability of funding for patenting and licensing of technologies. For example, I'll give you one example. Just recently, I personally had to give up a patent that was a provisional patent that was filed with one of my former graduate students who's the president of a small company here in town, because his small company couldn't afford to license that or pay for that patent and license it. And we don't know if that was going to be a profitable patent or not, but it may have been. So that lack of finances is, I think, impairing the effective transfer of technology to small businesses. And all of our optical companies in Bozeman, except for maybe one or two who have been bought by large corporations, are small companies. We have great ideas and technology. I would like to see improved opportunity for those small businesses to commercialize those technologies. Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, thanks, Joseph. Appreciate it. Dave Paulson, a research professor with the Department of Biomedical and Pharmaceutical Sciences at the University of Montana.
Thank you, Senator Tester, for the opportunity to come here and share my thoughts today. I have kind of a unique perspective. I am a research professor at the University of Montana. And 5 years ago, we started up a company, a small biotech pharmaceutical company, to develop a drug therapy that was discovered in my lab for the whole purpose of translating that technology to a point where it could be applied to patients in the clinic. As I've gone through that process of building a company and developing technology out of the university over the last 5 years, it's been quite a learning educational experience. A few things that I have learned in the process. What I realized is that the effort that we went through to move a drug into the clinic could be done quicker and more often than the process it took for us to get it through. Part of, as has been mentioned here, a critical piece is gap funding. The only way that we were able to move this technology forward was through taking advantage of the Montana Board of Research and Commercialization Technology funding. Without that, we could not have moved this forward. The other critical piece that helped us tremendously was the research tax credit, and I would strongly encourage that we, if possible, make this a permanent fixture. It was a key piece that we needed. What I've come to understand is that with the role of the universities in a knowledge-based economy, it's universities, and particularly research universities, play a critical key role. Research is the process of converting money to knowledge. Well, that's actually only half of the equation. That's the part that we do really, really well. The part that we need to work better on is converting knowledge into application. That requires innovation. So one of the recommendations that I would make is, as a research faculty, it's very difficult to, and looking forward down the road, very daunting prospect of moving a product from my lab into the clinic. If there is an infrastructure in place that would facilitate that, then it would be less intimidating, and faculty would be more inclined to move forward with those technologies. Therefore, one of the things I would suggest is that each campus establish a proof of concept center. All of these technologies that we develop in the lab are high risk, low value. Nobody's willing to license them at that point. We need to move them through the phase, and in my case, the preclinical development, early clinical development phase, to increase the value and reduce the risk so someone would be interested in licensing that. That's a long, drawn-out, hard process. If I had had someone basically to provide the adult supervision that I needed to be able to move through that process, I think it could be done quicker and much easier, more often. One of the things that I think would also be of benefit to us here in the state of Montana is a statewide technology transfer office with agents on each campus where there's a consorted, coordinated effort in technology transfer and additional funding to support, as others have mentioned, patent portfolio development. I would strongly encourage also increasing funding for the MBRCT program here in the state. And finally, there's quite often not a huge incentive for tenured faculty in the university system to do this. We need to come up with ways that incentivize faculty to move things forward. It's just simply too daunting a process to jump into without having a reasonable carrot to motivate people into it. Those would be one last comment. The question came up was with regard to the potential of open sourcing research through the universities. I think that is a great idea if you're Microsoft or Google. It is a terrible idea if you're biotech or pharma. That would be the kiss of death. The only way, I mean, it takes a lot of money and a lot of time to move technology forward. Without patent protection and intellectual property protection, no one would do it. It would basically kill innovation and drug development in that field. So thank you for this opportunity. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks, Dave. We've got about, well, almost 15 minutes for questions. I'm going to start out with one, and you know, I'll direct it to Becky, and then if somebody else wants to kick in after she gets done, that's fine, because it could go to any one of you four. What opportunities exist for Montana's universities to improve collaboration and to leverage the strengths that they have, remove barriers to develop innovations and formation of successful small businesses?
Certainly, we can always improve. I think that we are focusing on that, Senator. The current EPSCoR project is for the state of Montana. The university system statewide is working hard on those collaborations. Joe and I personally meet several times a year to collaborate on how we do tech transfer, what's going on at each campus, what we're thinking, how we can move forward, how we can work together when there's expertise at one campus that isn't possessed at the other. There's always room to improve that, but I think we're making great progress along that line, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else want to comment on that? Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I'm not sure how well this will be liked, but I think that from a perspective of a rural state in Montana, I came from Mississippi about 2 years ago and met many of the same challenges that you have in a rural state: lack of access to investment capital, lack of true technology centers in terms of corporate America. I mean, there are a lot of challenges that are up against us. And so I really think that as a state, as a university system, we really need to think regionally. And maybe that includes outside the state of Montana. I know there are lots of models in terms of the idea states that follow this. But just one sort of brief example with regard to translational research. I commented on Dave Polson's efforts earlier. But it's critical for us to take a look at what we can and we can't do. And even though we might have some expertise in some of the preclinical areas of life science research, there are clearly some areas that we don't have expertise. And so we've been able to reach out to the University of Washington and begin to create some discussions at that level in terms of how we can better leverage some of their expertise and their resources so that we can work together as a region and really enhance our biotech and life science presence.
Very good. People from the audience, do you have any questions for the folks up here? Yes, go ahead. You can go ahead and grab a mic. If we're just go ahead. There's one right behind you. Go ahead and grab a mic. And yeah, go ahead. Yep.
My name is Philip Fletcher. I represent Park County, which is just on the other side of the hill, but in the market and trade area of Bozeman. Speaking somewhat as a geographer and economist, I have a question, particularly to the MSU people, but I think it applies broader than that. All the conversation today has been Bozeman or Missoula. And as you all know, there's a huge differential across the state in economic opportunity, jobs, and this sort of thing. We have, just as an example, as a suburban county, we have land, we have money, we have investors, one of the highest population rates of postgraduate degrees. We have hundreds and hundreds of people going back and forth between Bozeman, et cetera, et cetera. What we would be interested in, I suspect quite a few other counties placed like you are, a type of partnership that goes beyond the partnership you're talking about so that we can plug in what you're doing, and if you need certain types of money, we have investors, we can get grants that you don't have access to, but we don't know what's going on. We don't know where we would fit in. We don't know what sort of, we want to build an incubator facility. What would fit into some range of plans? So it's a combination of question and comment that I think it's really important around the state, particularly where these flagship universities are, to develop some sort of meaningful partnership so we can find out what's going on, participate in this.
It's a great question. I don't know who would like to address it, but how do you do the outreach to let people know to be able to maximize their abilities?
That's an excellent question, and I would welcome the opportunity to network more closely with you on that issue. We do provide engineering services in our manufacturing extension center for the entire state. We do have focus on the entire state, but you're correct. Most of the high-tech companies are clustering around the two universities because of the proximity to our researchers. I think some of that can be extended. We work, for instance, with a company in Harleton. Our ag extension people are all over the state, in every county, providing for information and expertise and those connections. That's not to say we do it as well as we could. We would love to have those conversations with you, connect our economic development people with yours, and then with, and also have the university at the table to see how we can impact your economy even more significantly than perhaps we already do.
You're actually in my phone book right now.
Excellent. Then use it.
Anybody else want to comment on that? Yes, go ahead.
Senator, if I may, just briefly, just as an example, the Optical Technology Center holds an annual conference. And that conference is primarily for the students and faculty doing optics research to get together and talk amongst themselves across departmental lines on campus. But also, we invite all the local optics industry people to come. And it's a great opportunity. It's a great forum where we get to know each other and know what's happening. That's an opportunity where people are welcome to come and find out who's doing what and to meet people. So yeah, that's a good point. Maybe we need to connect and let you know of those opportunities.
Very good. Go ahead, April.
You've talked about the high cost of licensing and patent fees. Could you give us an actual dollar amount example of what that range might be?
You want to address that?
Yeah, be happy to. It's not unusual to reach $100,000 very quickly. Once you've entered into the international fields, you have to pay fees annually in every country. Somebody opens a filing cabinet in Japan, it costs you a couple $1,000s. Typically for drug development, it's not unusual for anywhere from $500 to $800 million from I have an idea to putting the drug into a patient in the clinic. Those are the costs we're talking about, and that's what we're looking at. Early stage development, to get from I have an idea to applying for an investigational new drug application, easily within the $10 million range. So for somebody at a university to say, like, for example, at the moment, we're trying to raise $10 million to complete a phase 2 human clinical trial. That seems like a very little amount of money in the big scheme of things, but in the current environment, it's very tough to come up with.
Yeah, go ahead in the back. Yeah.
I'm Wendy Lewis. I'm with the Bozeman Economic Development Council. And I went to a presentation here in Bozeman from the Department of Energy. And they actually asked the room, were we collaborating at all with the University of Utah? Because there was an article in Inc. magazine about their outreach. He's nodding. So I think your point about regional collaboration is really well taken. And we don't have to think in terms of traditional boundaries because these clusters and innovation aren't happening within geographic regions necessarily. In other words, I'm just saying that Utah and Montana can be in the same region. So I wanted to ask if that's something you would have any congressional influence on creating larger regional things.
Well, I would just say this. I don't know what the barriers are right now. I don't know if there are any, or if it's just haven't been thinking in that realm. But I think the point that Joe brought up and others that there's some opportunity to dovetail with other universities and what they're doing, and those folks to dovetail with us, quite frankly, to be able to get some of the research being done further advanced and into the private sector. And so, if there's things we can do at the policy level in Washington D.C., tell me what they are. We'll get after it. If you guys know of any.
Well, and both of our universities participate in collaborations that certainly extend beyond state lines. Our carbon sequestration project involves several universities, companies across the nation. We're in a biomedical collaboration that originates in Colorado. I know U of M has similar collaborations. So are we doing this enough, Wendy? I'm sure not, but it's not off of our radar screen.
Yeah, and maybe if I could add to that, I mean, from a research perspective, I think we do a great job of collaborating. I mean, that's how we actually can maintain our competitiveness at the federal level these days. But from a perspective of commercialization and innovation and those type things, I think that we need to begin thinking a little bit further outside of the box. And that's contrary to traditional thought, which is Montana or whatever state that you're in, which is we want our research dollars to contribute directly into our state. But I think there's a bit of more of a paradigm shift as opposed to maybe a policy issue that can help us move in that direction.
We only have time for one more, so you're it.
Great. My name is Gary Gannon. I've been involved in building businesses my whole life, and have spent the lion's share of my life in Northern California. and here I'm working really hard to do what I can to help the university in regard to entrepreneurship, and also working on my own to develop organizations here in Montana. And one of the things that that's become apparent is that there's sort of a magic about a culture of entrepreneurship, and it exists in certain areas like Boston, in Northern California, and it's created generally from universities. And I just wondered if the panel could discuss a couple issues. One has to do with the idea of sort of a public-private partnership and a state partnership, and perhaps your office's Senator Tester, in really trying to coordinate the development of a culture that is designed around entrepreneurship. And the other point that perhaps the panelists could talk about, it appears to me that there is a real lack of capital that flows into early stage organizations. And I've heard, from some of the people on the panel and other people here in the room, that even if you have a success, in fact, I think in the photonics world, sometimes the venture capitalists in Sand Hill Boulevard will say, you got to move your operation to California if you want money. And so there's this real gap. I know that there's expressed interest, but I just wondered if there's a way that this can be coordinated in developing of a culture and creating the attraction for capital, more early stage capital to flow into organizational development.
I would just say this, and you guys can comment. We're going to have some folks up here on a later panel that's going to talk about venture capital availability and what inhibits it, what can make it happen, what stops it from happening. From the culture standpoint, this is a very interesting question, because we just heard Joe talk about the fact 10 years ago Bozeman wasn't on the map, and now it's on the map. And probably the same could be said for the University of Montana. And I think that success, success builds on success, and the more success we can have, the more you can. I mean, we know we got quality of life. Okay, that's a good thing for recruitment. But on the other side of the coin, the more success we have, the better I think it is going to be to develop that culture. I'm not sure, and I'm open to any ideas out there that we can do at the federal level to help develop a culture of entrepreneurship and advancement for tech companies. It'd be great. Anybody else want to respond to that? Go ahead.
Yeah, and I could tie this back to a previous question. When we look at the possibilities, we've heard the same thing. If you want to start a biotech company, move to San Diego. Well, we don't want to move to San Diego. We like living here. But it is very difficult to acquire venture capital funding here in the state. The Biotechnology Industry Organization, for example, has state affiliates in every state in the United States. In this region, it would make sense for us to perhaps combine as a consortium of bio-affiliates. And within that regional Intermountain Consortium, begin to establish venture funds or mechanisms that attract venture funding specifically to those regions. The other thing I think that we could potentially do with regard to the SBIR program is establish a mechanism similar to what we have with the IDEA state funding for NIH and NSF through the SBIRs, so that rural states like Montana have an advantage within the SBIR funding pool.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I think that culture exists here, at least in the optics community. I'm looking at Pete Ruse sitting back here. He was in my first class I taught when I came to MSU, and I thought, man, this guy's smart. And that's a big part of it right there at the local level, is we put out really smart guys that just want to be in Montana, and they look around and they don't see a job, so they create it. And now Pete's creating jobs for all these other people that are coming out of our university and others. But I think there's, through SBIR programs and better access to patenting and that kind of costs, that greases the skids for that to happen.
Okay.
So if I could add on to that comment, I think the optics area part of what develops that culture is the very direct interaction between the researchers at the university and the technology-based companies
Yeah.
that involves the students. So they see that interaction, they see what's going on in the startup companies.
That's a good
And
point.
It raises the opportunity, and I think that's something that OpTech has done very well since its inception.
This is Lee Spangler, the former director of OpTech, and that's a very good point, Lee. We do. We have a lot of interaction, and that interaction, I think, really is key.
Well, thank you. You have some time to interact if there's other questions out there with the panel. We're going to take a quick little break and be back at 10:30 with our second panel. Thank you.